Welcome to a new video in which I'm gonna talk about the two Waffen-SS divisions that consisted of Muslims. Toward the end of World War II, a significant portion of Nazi Germany's armed forces consisted of ethnic Germans from outside the German Reich and non-Germans from the Western and Central Europe, the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. That wide range of ethnic groups and nationalities included Bosnians, with two SS divisions of their own. The story of a military ideological experiment to win the Muslims to the National Socialist cause, the background of the Yugoslavic civil war raging within World War II. The Bosnians are a southern Slavic people who speak a variant of Serbo-Croatian. It differs from ethnically related Croats and Serbs in that address to Sunni Islam rather than Catholic or Orthodox Christianity. Their ancestors had gradually converted to Islam after the Ottoman Empire invaded and annexed the ancient kingdom of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the second half of the 15th century. By the year 1600, the population of Bosnia was predominantly Muslim. After the end of the Ottoman rule in the region in 1878, Bosnia and Herzegovina became protectorates and later autonomous realms to the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy until 1918. Before becoming part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia until 1941. From April 1941 to May 1945, the territories of the Bosnian Muslims were part of the so-called Independent State of Croatia, the OSK, established after the capitulation of the Yugoslav army against the Germans and Italians and the dissolution of the Yugoslav kingdom. The OSK, which included all of present-day Croatia, with the exception of Istria and pieces of Dalmatia, all of Bosnia-Herzegovina and a few districts of Serbia, was independent in name but in practice was a protectorate of the Axis powers. Nazi Germany occupied the interior including Bosnia and Herzegovina. Fascist Italy occupied the Dalmatian Adriatic coast and its immediate hinterland until the fall of 1943. It also installed an Italian prince as the official king of Croatia. However, the actual head of state of the OSK was Prime Minister Ante Pavelic, who also was the leader of the fascist Ustaša movement. Although the OSK was established as a greater Croatian homeland, only half of its 6.5 million inhabitants were proper Roman Catholic Croats. Serbs and other Orthodox Christians made up about a third, and the approximately 770,000 Muslims, mainly Bosnians, more than a tenth of the OSK's population. Thus, to boost the proportion of ethnic Croats in the country and counteract the rise of a Bosnian national movement, Bosnian Muslims were not counted as separate ethnic groups but were considered ethnic Croats of Muslims rather than Roman Catholic faith. The OSK regime also officially recognized Sunni Islam alongside Roman Catholicism as the faith of the Croatian nation. Bosnians and their notables and spiritual hierarchy generally had a mixed feeling about the OSK and Pavelic rule. Like many Croats, some Bosnians initially welcomed the establishment of an independent Croatia as a kind of liberation from the heavily Serb-dominated Yugoslav kingdom. Croat Bosniak Muslims were also represented in the OSK parliament, in which they were allowed a quota of 6% of the seats. 2 of the 20 ministers in the OSK government were Bosnian Muslims. The Ustaša movement became dominated by the ultra-nationalists who wanted to make Croatia an ethnically pure society as quickly as possible. Its notorious paramilitary units and death squads indulged in an increasingly threefold terrorization of ethnic and religious minorities. The Orthodox Serb population of Krajina, Bosnia and Eastern Slavonia were particularly targeted. They became the target of the interment, extermination, forced conversion to the Roman Catholic faith, or expulsion to equally occupied Serbia. The Ustaša also managed about 20 concentration camps. Estimates on the number of ethnic Serbs who were purged during that period vary widely, but run around 500,000 out of a Serbian population in the OSK of some 2 million. Although the Muslims of Bosnia and Herzegovina were officially recognized as fully fledged Croats, many nevertheless became concerned that after the Serbs they could become the next target of the Ustaša's death squads. Sometimes loose groups of Ustaša attacked Bosnian villages, and because they were considered Croats, Bosnians also became the target of Serbs seeking to avenge their slain compatriots and family members. It characterized the Yugoslavic civil war within the World War that had been raging on OSK territory and in Bosnia-Herzegovina in particular since 1941. Croatian nationalists, Serbian and Bosnian self-defense groups, Serbian royalists who wanted to restore the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and communists who wanted a socialist federation Yugoslavia fought each other. Bosnians, who certainly among the Serbs were seen not only as Croats and OSK supporters, but also as Turks and compliers of the old Ottoman occupiers, shared heavily in the blows. It is estimated that about 1/10 of their population perished during the 1941-1945 civil war. To protect their villages and communities, they organized their own militias and armed villages, whether under the regular OSK army or not. Some Bosnians decided to join the Yugoslav communists, who at least had a multi-ethnic consistency and promised religious freedom. But many were aware of the treatment meted out of the Islamic region and believing Muslims in the Communist Soviet Union of the 1920s and 1930s, and thus were fit to make common cause with the communists at home. A section of Bosnians and Bosnian notables began to see in their German occupier increasingly a neutral external force in the civil conflict. Older notables and veterans who still served in the Austro-Hungarian army also remembered the local autonomy and rights the Bosnians enjoyed during the dual monarchy. Although the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy absolutely cannot be compared to Nazi empire and system, some Bosnians hoped to gain similar autonomy and treatment through collaboration in the post-war German order. It was in these circumstances that in February 1943 the Hansa Division came into being. The German occupiers, well aware that they had been dragged into a veritable hornet's nest, where it was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish friend from foe, had already begun recruitment of local SS volunteers units in the OSK and other pieces of Yugoslavia in January 1942. For obvious reasons, the first local SS units were recruited from among ethnic Germans of old Yugoslavia. The idea was that native SS troops would take over policing tasks and guerrilla fighting, rather than relying solely on the OSK army and the unaccountable Ustasa militias for this purpose. The working-class German and Bosnian divisions were expected to protect their own working-class communities, participate in the local economy to earn a living, and use their good terrain knowledge to fight Yugoslav communist resistance. What the SS leadership envisioned, much to the chagrin of the OSK government and the Croatian nationalists, in the long run were autonomous communities of working-class German and Bosnian soldier farmers. The SS also deployed local auxiliaries to guard the iron and bauxite mines in Bosnia and Herzegovina that supplied raw materials for the industries in Germany. From 1943, the deployment of local units also allowed the transfer of Reich German soldiers from the Yugoslav front to the Eastern Front. At its peak, the Hansa Division numbered some 23,000 troops, the foot soldiers and non-commissioned officers, the majority from these countrysides were Bosnian Muslims. The division heads and most of the 360 Hansa officers were Yugoslav folk Germans. The Turkish vests that accompanied the uniforms also had to be worn by German commanders. The SS sent a number of Bosnians and Catholic Croats for military training to the south of France. But when it turned out, contrary to the original promise, the SS leadership intended to use the Bosnians there against the Maquis, the French armed resistance, rather than in their homeland. One of the largest mutinies the military SS had known in its ranks broke out in September 1943. Other men were trained in camps in German Silesia before being deployed to Bosnia and Herzegovina. In the spring of 1944, the SS leadership set up a second Bosnian Muslim unit, the Kama. This sister division of the Hansa totaled just under 3,800 troops. Here too, most of the commanders were Yugoslav. With an appeal by Adolf Hitler and Croatian leader Ante Pavlic to Muslim Croats from Bosnia and Herzegovina to enlist in the Croatian volunteer unit of the SS and defend their homes and hearts against the communists. The Hansa and its Kama sister division had thus arisen in the specific context and war conditions of Yugoslavia. Most of the men were driven by local conditions in Bosnia itself and by anti-communism, rather than by international jihadism, the situation in the Arab region and broader Islamic world. However, their division also provided the blueprint and a true pilot project for the other combat units the SS planned to set up for Muslims, primarily the Central Asian, Tatar and Caucasian Muslims from the Soviet Union, who had been defected out of resentment due to the misdeeds of Stalinism in the 1930s, or had been recruited by the German armed forces among the many Soviet prisoners of war. It was also hoped to attract Iraqi, Palestinian and other Arab volunteers, in order to employ Muslims in their war against communism and against the Allies, who at that time still exercised colonial rule or protectorate over numerous Islamic regions and countries. The Nazis tried to propagate a synesthesis between National Socialism and Islam. To do this, they needed the cooperation of a high Islamic authority. This did not become a Bosnian, but a very controversial Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini. A senior Islamic jurist and hardened Arab nationalist, he led several Palestinian uprisings between 1920 and 1939 against increasing Jewish immigration into Palestine. Later, he also turned against the British Mandate regime in Palestine because, in his opinion, it did nothing to stop Jewish immigration. In April 1941, he also actively supported al-Gilani's anti-British coup in Iraq. Several months later, al-Husseini went to Germany, where he remained until the end of the war, trying to rally support for Arab independence from the highest Nazi leadership. The Grand Mufti visited the Handschar troops and took photographs with them at their training camps in Silesia, Sarajevo and southern France. Together with his mainly Iraqi entourage, he was active in producing ideological pamphlets and pro-German and anti-Semitic propaganda for the Handschar troops and Muslims in general. To show these that Nazis had good intentions for the Muslims, Handschar men and other Bosnians had to feature regularly in propaganda films and photo shoots. To what extent were the Handschar and Kama division actively involved in war crimes and genocides in Bosnia and OSK? The units were deployed in Bosnia and Herzegovina primarily against the Yugoslav communist resistance and villages cooperating with them, and not against the Jews, who had already largely been deported or had fled from the Ustasa when the Handschar and Kama became active there. According to the French historian Javier Bujarel, who published a book on the Handschar in 2020, its men killed some 2,300 civilians in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Compared to what the Ustasa and German SS troops did, this was, as far as appropriate to express it that way, relatively light. In the fall of 1944, as the OSK began to fall apart and tensions grew between the Bosnians and their German commanders, many Handschar and Kama men deserted to the remnants of the Croatian army, exchanging their uniforms for civil clothing and retreating with their weapons to their villages, with their families, or sometimes joining the Yugoslav communist resistance that was winning. The remnants of the two Bosnian divisions, still some 5,000 to 6,000 men, continued to fight along the Danube alongside the SS units of the Yugoslav and Hungarian Germans against the advancing Soviet troops, before surrendering to the Allies in Austrian Carinthing in May 1945. The latter handed them over to Yugoslavia, where the new communist rule organized a collaboration and war crime tribunal in Sarajevo in August 1947. Several hundred former division members received prison sentence or were sentenced to death. Others were able to escape in full late war chaos. A few hundred former division members reportedly migrated to Syria after the war and were still active in the 1948-1949 Arab-Israeli War. Al-Husseini was also able to flee Germany and was granted asylum in Egypt in 1946. However, the demons of that period were not dead. Indeed, this deeply tragic chapter and its traumatic memories explain in part the behavior of the Serbian militias in eastern Slavonia and Bosnia during the Yugoslav Civil War of 1992 and 1995. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and hope to see you in the next video.